Established in 1926, the GAO School is the first school in the nation created for students with dyslexia and other language-based learning differences.
Today, GAO is a premier boarding and day school for students in grades 5 through postgraduate.
Located 30 minutes from Buffalo, New York, GAO's campus features 7 dormitories, classrooms, an indoor athletic center, sports fields, theater and art studios, a robotics lab, and more.
To find out more about this nurturing and supportive academic environment, please visit www.gao.org or call 716-652-3450. So, hey, Melissa.
Hey, Amy.
So, your voice sounds great. I like it. Is this a new thing?
It's not as sexy as it normally is.
I like it. I like it. My kids always used to tell me I sounded like Marge Simpson when I would go hoarse. So, and I was like, oh, homie, I can't do it. You know, I can't do it with my normal voice. And that really sounded stupid. But,
well, I wound up with laryngitis yesterday, and I texted you and said in all caps, I have laryngitis.
And
because I knew that we had this important interview today.
And on my side, I go, oh, heck no. And I did not use the word heck. And I was like, what are we going to do? We can't reschedule this because this was a big one. Y'all, do you know who we interviewed today?
Unbelievably.
Unbelievably.
We had Dr. Maryanne Wolf.
Maryanne Wolf was on our podcast today, and we were just floored. She is so sweet and so kind and so knowledgeable. And I know we say that about everybody, but she's knowledgeable in a way that doesn't make you feel dumb. You know, it makes you feel like, and I think she's actually going to take some of what Melissa said and incorporate it into lectures now, which I was like, oh, man.
I was floored. So you guys have to listen to that part.
Yeah. So if you have been living under a rock and you don't know who Maryanne Wolf is, sorry, I'm not being insulting, but you know, she's kind of been out there for a long time. She's a scholar, teacher, and advocate for children and literacy around the world. And she's the director of the newly created Center for Dyslexia, Diverse Learners, and Social Justice at UCLA Graduate School of Education and Information Studies. She is also the author of Proust and Squid. I used to say Proust until I realized it was French. So it's Proust and the Squid, The Story of Science in the Reading Brain, Dyslexia, Fluency in the Brain, Tales of Literacy for the 21st Century, and Reader Come Home, The Reading Brain in a Digital World. And we addressed all of these aspects with her. It was a great interview.
You know, I was kind of surprised to learn that she was a teacher turned cognitive neuroscience. Like, who does that?
Right. Who does that? Not me.
Maryanne Wolf.
Right. So my story, and y'all heard, if you're listening to the podcast, you hear it at the very end. When I was still teaching therapy in one of the local districts, on my dyslexia team was a teacher named Dora Lynn. And Dora Lynn was just so sweet. And she was really working because she loves therapy. She didn't have to work. She just loved providing therapy for students with dyslexia. And so we got to be buddies, and she was just so sweet and kind and wonderful. And then when I changed districts, she eventually ended up in the other district I was in. I don't know if we were at a meeting or if we were out to lunch or something. And she goes, oh, my daughter's dating Dr. Wolf's, I think she said Maryanne Wolf's son. And I go, what? Wait a minute. She waited like 15, 20 minutes. I was like, you're burying the lead here. Like, the Maryanne Wolf? Are you serious? She goes, yeah. And I was like, what? And so a few years later, I ran into her again because we weren't working in the same district. And she goes, oh, my daughter got married to Maryanne Wolf's son. I was like, what? So now you're related? And when Melissa and I were at IDA for the dyslexia duo, Dr. Wolf was there with Dora Lynn, and I ran into Dora Lynn. She goes, oh, I'm working for Maryanne now. I go, what? You know, you're calling her by her first name? Yeah. So we got to walk up and introduce ourselves. And Dr. Wolf said, any friend of Dora Lynn's is a friend of ours. So I guess we can go over and eat supper sometime, you know, if we're out that way.
Maybe we could be on a first name basis too.
I don't know. I can't do that. She's going to be Dr. Wolf because that's that level of respect. So, okay. But I hope y'all enjoy this podcast. It was really a lot of fun to record. So this is Amy.
And Melissa.
And we're signing off so you can listen to the podcast. Thanks, guys. Bye. Hi, this is Amy.
And Melissa. We are a couple of retired Texas teachers who are CALTs, Certified Academic Language Therapists. We started our own businesses, and now we have a podcast called
The Dyslexia Duo. So join us for our informative podcast, where we'll delve into dyslexia, covering the topics that affect parents, therapists, teachers, practitioners, and anyone who wants to learn more. We'll guide you through everything you need to know, from the first signs to the intricacies of dyslexia curriculum placement and beyond.
This season, we will cover the referral process, what to expect when your child or student is dyslexic, the generational impacts of dyslexia, and how to support those affected.
Come join us.
And Melissa with laryngitis.
And we're the Dyslexia Duo. So we're here today and all our guests are wonderful and special. But when I found out that this particular guest was willing to come on our podcast, I about fell on the floor. So I'm going to leave it open to our special guest to introduce herself and tell everybody a little bit about herself.
Well, I guess this makes it a trio instead of a duo today.
That's right.
Yes.
And it is a joy to be with Amy and Melissa. My name is Maryanne Wolf. I am an advocate for children. More than anything else, my whole life is spent about how we can introduce children to the world of not language, which they come to us with, but written language. And so I have studied the reading brain for many years and have written quite a few books. I'll say two of them: Proust and the Squid, The Story and Science of the Reading Brain, and most recently, or more recently, The Reading Brain in a Digital World, which the title for it is Reader Come Home. And so today I'm with Melissa without a voice and Amy with a voice to speak about how my work on reading, the reading brain, from the standpoint of cognitive neuroscience and linguistics, has so much to offer our teachers in the classroom. And so my work at UCLA as the director of the Center for Dyslexia, Diverse Learners, and Social Justice is about how we can take that knowledge base and bring it to life in the classroom.
Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. So what got you interested in becoming a cognitive neuroscientist? What drove your interest in that?
Well, Amy, it's a story of teaching. I always knew from the time I was a young child, when we had a club that I was, well, let's say titularly the secretary of, and our motto was to educate education. I still can't believe that, a 7, 8-year-old would have, there's a great word, chutzpah. How I had the chutzpah to have this ambition. But the reality was, it was all about teaching what I could teach. And in the beginning, it was English literature. I have 2 degrees in English literature and thought that would be my PhD. I would teach in a college and that would be my life. The reality is that I became a different kind of teacher because of a life that I also had, which was, how can we be truly releasing the potential of people who were in environments where that was not possible. And so I joined a Peace Corps-like teaching group that sent me to Hawaii, rural Hawaii, where there was almost no roads at that time where I was. And most of the children lived in families indentured to plantations. And that's when I discovered that for me, the understanding of literacy, the understanding that would help me teach the children I was failing to teach in that Peace Corps setting would have to be the change in my life. And so I ended up at Harvard Reading Lab studying how in the world the brain learns to read. It was my insight then and throughout my life that the more we learn about how the brain develops reading, the better we can teach. And so that experience of becoming a failing teacher, I failed to teach all those children. I loved them. They loved me. I will never forget. I still know their names when I can't even remember some of my neighbors' names. I still know them. And that experience changed me into basically a cognitive neuroscientist. And the thing about cognitive means that we are studying how the brain actually uses different cognitive processes, thought processes, language processes. And so it's not a bench scientist where we're studying cells, but we do study what are the areas in the brain that make a circuit. And that's what I'm really, if you will, using more than anything else, how our understanding of a circuit in the brain, which connects other circuits, helps teachers understand what they have to teach. So I'm going to anticipate one of your questions that will come at the end, which is, well, how do you do that?
Yes.
I'll just
Right.
say that became the basis for my research in intervention, which ultimately became the RAVO program. At the end of this program, we'll talk about, but it all is part of the story, if you will, of how I wanted to teach children who were failing or struggling for whatever reason. Some were poor, some were multilingual, some were dyslexic, but I didn't know any of that. And in a way, that's the way many of our young teachers come to their first, second, and third grade classrooms. They don't know any of that information. So it's my job to help teach them.
Wow. That's wonderful. And you're just very inspiring, just with your background and then the drive as to why you did all that is just inspiring.
You know, that leads me to kind of our next question, our next topic. I believe that you, me, Amy, a lot of the teachers out there in the United States and elsewhere, we believe that reading is a human right. That's why we're so passionate about it. And we know that you believe that. So what do you feel like that means to you personally?
Good question, Melissa, and one that I think about because each of us has an ordinary life, and that ordinary life has meaning that we constantly have to look at. We want to love our family, our friends, or me, my spiritual life, but how do we love and put that love in the context of our work? So for me, from the start of my epiphany in Hawaii, I realized that if I don't teach these children to read and become literate, they may well replicate their parents' I don't want to say impoverished lives, but impoverished conditions in which they were indentured to basically large plantations. That is a metaphor for me to say that I hope that all of us can contribute to releasing the potential of every child. And literacy within that context is the vehicle for doing it better than almost any other skill that humanity has invented. And so for me, teaching teachers how best to release the potential, it should be considered a basic human right around the world, around our backyard, around our city, our state, our country, and our place in multiple countries. Part of my work was in Africa 10 years ago because we were trying to figure out how some of our work might help children who had no school, no running water, no electricity, who lived off the grid. And so part of that basic human right philosophy stems also from working in places where there is no teacher, there is no teaching method. Rather, there is a desire to see what one can do with what's available to release their potential. So it's a big, it's a little tiny statement in a big context.
To me, what I think about that too is that sometimes people take for granted the ability to read easily.
Yes.
And so it comes easily to some people, and some other people, it doesn't come easily. Obviously, we know those people. It can be easy for people to take that for granted and not be able to put themselves in other people's shoes, that it is a harder skill to acquire for some people.
It is actually harder than most people realize for most people. There are outliers. There are outliers, but Melissa and Amy and I are all dedicated to those who struggle most. If the audience can't see me, maybe we'll take a picture of the painting behind me, but it's one of the several paintings I have from an LA dyslexic artist who happens to be my son.
Oh my
And,
gosh.
you know, I know firsthand the experience of being not just a researcher in dyslexia, but a mother. And that has been an enormously important part of my advocacy. But I was studying dyslexia before my son was ever born, because one of the amazing things about being in cognitive neuroscience is that you study both typical and atypical development, and you learn from both. And so I learned way before Ben was born that studying dyslexia was going to help me help teachers teach all children, because the more you know about dyslexia, the more you know about how to teach any child. So dyslexia is a really important phenomenon. It's basically a different organization of the human brain that advantages some areas like art and architecture, entrepreneurship, but it is not a brain that was organized to learn written language, which requires these, as I said, these wonderful circuits that just weren't there. So the fact is, reading is complex. It is beautiful, but it is never to be taken for granted by any child. Bravo to the outliers who seem to learn it naturally. There is nothing natural about learning to read. It's an invention that requires a new circuitry in the brain.
Now a word from our newest sponsor.
Is your child struggling with reading, writing, or spelling?
Do you suspect they might have dyslexia?
At Hill Country Dyslexia Services, our team of experienced educational diagnosticians are here to help.
We offer a thorough evaluation process at HCDS to help you identify your child's needs.
Call us today at 512-648-2291 to schedule an appointment and take the first step towards supporting your child's learning journey. Let's return to the show. And it's not something that the brains have evolved into, you know, because we hear about listening and speaking is natural.
That's right.
But reading and writing has to be explicitly taught. And the brains have not evolved to the point where you can't not teach it. It has to be explicitly taught in order to learn it.
You know, that's one of the harder aspects of our society. We were not sure how to teach reading. We haven't been sure how to teach reading for 3 centuries. The French elite used basically a phonics-like method, whereas the bourgeoisie, the rest of us were given the Bible, and it was hoped that we would induce. They didn't use those terms. But then in the 20th century, there became, I would say, the romance of a great but incorrect idea. And that is that children, given the best kinds of literature, would automatically learn, or not automatically, but they would over time induce the alphabetic principle. Now, it is the case that I would say a fair number of our children can over time do that, but they are much more easily learning if they are explicitly taught. But a huge number of children need to be explicitly taught. Every struggling reader needs explicit instruction. And that's part of actually what Melissa said, that people really think, oh, they take it for granted. Anybody can do it. You can talk, so you can read. And Amy, you put your finger right on the assumption that is guiding incorrect methods. The assumption is that it's taken for granted. Anybody can induce it, and you don't need to teach it. They'll learn it. You just put them in that environment. That is such a shame, because the people who are teaching that way have wonderful insights into literature, into language, and that should never be lost. So I always invite, like I did a Teachers College keynote for teaching the science in an expanded way, so they know to be explicit is not to dull the senses or the imagination, rather to release them through knowledge. So explicit teaching is one of the most important certainties about how to teach most of our children, but almost all of our struggling readers. There's always exceptions to everything I say. And so, I never want to say something that I have to eat immediately afterwards, but I'm pretty safe on this one, that I only have to eat a few words when we have so much evidence that explicit and systematic teaching is best for most children. And that does not, and it's not an and or a but or a yet, it's an and. The expertise of our whole language and balanced literacy teachers is not just welcome, it's wonderful, as long as it's in conjunction with explicit teaching of these parts of the reading brain, whether we call it phoneme awareness or semantics or orthography. Basically, we need an understanding of how to teach and learn the alphabetic principle and what contributes to it and fluency and connects to authentic literature or inauthentic literature. I write a lot of decodable stories. Some people, despite my 2 degrees in English, may call that inauthentic. I call it story.
Yeah. That's awesome. I want to talk a little bit about, we've talked about the science of reading. And of course, this report is now from 2000, the National Reading Panel report, talked about the big 5, the 5 pillars of reading. And a lot of dyslexia curricula utilize this data, and some don't. They should. But how can teachers supplement these areas? Maybe it's missing a fluency piece.
Definitely.
What can they do to support fluency within a particular curriculum, dyslexia or not?
Yeah, it's a perfect expression, dyslexia or not. These are the same principles. The brain is the brain. And a fluent brain, whether it's a dyslexic fluent brain or a typical fluent brain, needs the contributions from many parts of that brain. And it's completely connected, Amy, to what I call an expanded understanding of the science of reading, an expanded understanding of foundational skills, an expanded understanding of fluency. Now, in the National Reading Panel, they included fluency, and they made a comment that was absolutely apt for that moment in time, which is 25 years ago or 24.
Yeah.
But they said, the only thing we have is repeated reading, but we know basically that more research has to be done. Well, unfortunately, so many people believe fluency can be changed by 2 things: by working on prosody, the melodic contour of reading, so that you have phrasing and all the things that make meaning more obvious when the human voice reads whatever they're reading, the text, and do what is called repeated reading, read it over and over again. Now, the problem is that is very nice, but it's insufficient. It's like, goodness gracious, you give a piece of what's necessary and you think, oh, that helps, but it doesn't help sufficiently for the child to become so automatic that they can allocate attention to stories, to text.
Yeah.
So my work on the reading brain is really about looking at all the things that contribute to a fluent, comprehending, reading, student, reader, whatever. It has to have all of the things that what other people might have called, not just, they might call them oral language processes, and they are that, but I call them expanded foundational skills. Now, let me be very specific, because this brings us to what I laughingly years ago called POSSUM, just to make sure everyone knows that there are these multiple contributions to foundational skills, and that the foundational skills in their entirety contribute to fluency, not repeated reading by itself, not prosody by itself. So POSSUM stands for a P, which stands for phonology, phoneme awareness, phonics, and prosody. All those are good things in the P. The O is orthographic processes, and P and O are basically the letter sound correspondence rules in the alphabetic principle. So the P and the O. So most people know that contributes. That what I also said was that these oral language processes that some people call oral, and I say they're oral and written processes. They're used in both. And that's the SS, which is semantics, syntax, and U is the conceptual understanding of that alphabetic principle and the conceptual or cognitive aspects of understanding text. So the P has multiple aspects, the U has multiple aspects, but basically I want people to understand that syntax, knowing how words work in sentences, is not just an oral language process, but a written language process that needs explicit teaching. Now, the semantics in the reading panel always included vocabulary, but from a cognitive neuroscience viewpoint, that is a lovely little word that is obfuscating a huge semantic development that the brain has, because words are connected to each other in multiple ways. They're connected by meaning, they're connected by form, they're connected by sound. So when you work on semantic development, you really are working way beyond learning, 10 or 20 words a week. No, you are working on understanding that a word can have multiple meanings, that's polysemy, that a word is connected in context to a sort of a neighborhood, a semantic neighborhood of words, that words can be connected by just the sounds they make. So all of these things are in semantic development. And that's part of a foundational skill that, if known, makes decoding faster. So the more you know about what it means, how it works in a sentence, understanding that these words work this way in text, and finally the M-Morphology, morphemes, one of my favorite things that people make fun of. They'll give me little, people at Mount St. Joseph gave me a little sticker that says morphemes are sexy. Well, okay. I think so. More power to anyone who will wear that sticker. But I just want to say that morphemes are one of the secret sauces of fluency. So together, all of those, phonology, orthography, semantics, syntax, understanding, and morphology, they contribute to fluency. And fluency is the bridge to true comprehension. So that's a long way of saying that the science of reading, when we just talk only about foundational skills, expands our understanding of decoding as contributed, fluency as contributed, and both of them as they contribute to comprehension. So this is way beyond what often narrowly goes into people's mind when they think about science of reading, their first and sometimes only association is the phonology and phoneme awareness research that we have done now for 40 years and has been, it's 50 years by now. Really, it began in the early 70s. And that is just great. We have really done a great job of teaching the alphabetic principle by our emphasis on understanding how important the connection between letter and sound. Those connections are so important. And so working on what we call phonemes, but some of you may know Mark Seidenberg's work, and he talks about phonemes as being abstract, and they are. But what I would just emphasize is they are our abstract representation of sounds that we need to connect conceptually and linguistically and orthographically to letters. So that's where it gets a little tricky. And I don't want to go into the linguistic weeds there, but he's making an important point because it also translates into don't just do a checklist and say, oh, I'm working on phonemes today. And you work on da, 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 da. That is not the way. You are working to connect sounds that represent an abstract phoneme with letters, which are their own form of visual abstraction. This is conceptually tougher than people realize, but you don't get there by just isolating phonemes. But you don't get there by ignoring them either. For me, the usefulness of our research is showing us how important they are in making that connection for children. But if you will, the downside is that some people then just have isolated phonemes. Now, that brings me to one last final point. And that is that when we talk about our kids, and here you are in Texas and I'm in California, and so many of our children are multilingual. And we have different orthographies in languages and we have different phonemes. So we do have to acknowledge that a large of our California and Texan children come with not all of those English phonemes there. And they have an orthography with 19 letters, and we have 26. So depending on whether they learn to read and in that second or third language, and those differences, that's when the emphasis on phonemes and letter are especially important, so that the phonemes that were not part of their first language are able to be part of the teaching. And Claude Goldenberg has some beautiful work on this. Elsa Carden. Well, there's so many really great people out there who are doing this work.
Thank you so much. My goodness. This concludes part 1 of our discussion with Maryanne Wolf. Join us next week as we continue our conversation. The Dyslexia Duo podcast hosts are Amy Rodenroth,
Melissa Dean.
Our producer is Greg Rodenroth.
You can find us on Facebook at The Dyslexia Duo.
Email us any questions or comments at thedyslexiaduo@gmail.com.
Awareness is so important. Share this podcast with your friends,
Family,
and teachers.
thanks for joining us.
Bye.